Thank you so much. It is my honor to be here with you. And I think as the speakers were going this morning, I just was being filled up. This is what I do for a living. But the message of the feminine genius and the message of dignity is something we so badly need to hear. And I got excited as I was given the first website and started to understand the theme of this conference. And just especially that message of beloved. And so I thought I'd just start with a little story. It's after lunch. Please don't fall asleep. You might like a couple stories this afternoon. So my friend works in New York City, and she one day was having a really bad day, and she went over to the Bronx and was walking through a park. And there were a couple little kids playing by themselves, and she didn't know where their family, where their mother was or kind of what their situation was. But as soon as her and her friend walked by, the kids screamed out like, "Oh, people, please play with us." And so they were screaming, "Push me on the swing, be here, come here." So she said they went and played for like 5 minutes, pushing these kids on the swing and being present in their lives. And then they had to go. She had to get back to work for lunch and different things. And as they walked away, the little girl opened her arms and she said, she was like this, and she's like, "Love me." And she put her hands out. And I think it's such a good expression of this beloved that my friend said, I was having such a bad day, but that's what I wanted. I wanted everybody just to love me. And that it's so true that we, for whatever reason, need an entire day on this topic because we don't want to sit in that. We don't want to recognize how deeply loved that we are. And it's the weirdest thing. The greatest and most amazing gift is God's love for us, that he's holding us in existence at every moment. And that's where we leave. We doubt that. We have insecurities about that. We have our wounds. We have all the things we've talked about this morning. But to sit in that sense of being beloved is so powerful. So I'm going to talk a lot about the feminine genius. And to go into that and to live that out in the world, to respond to your own genius, you have to first know that, to recognize how much you are loved at every single second of every single day. And so just sit there for a second. I love that we're Catholic and that we can come to a church and sit right in the presence of God. Be in this church this entire day. You have sat in the literal presence of God. And let's open our hearts to that more. You've got a couple more hours to really relish in the gift of this. And as I saw the setup and saw that I'd be standing here, I was reminded of my very first job after college. And I was entering the workforce, and I had this insurance position, and one of my bosses came in, and she was just going to tell me how to do an office. And she's like, to have feng shui and peace in your life, you need to have an image of strength behind you. And so, as I looked at what would be behind me today, I have to smile. We have these giants, and they're literally giant posters, of women who've gone before us, these women of strength. And they're some of my absolute favorites. St. Edith Stein is one of my most favorite heroes in this world. And St. Teresa of Lisieux, this just teaching us the little way, not forgetting how simple and straight and clear the path is straight to God when we're little and beloved, and rest in that. We could talk about the doctors of the church. Like, women of strength have gone before us and remind us, first and foremost, to live in that love of God. And all of these women behind us have the courage, have had the strength to start there, and then to let their genius transform the world. I just love the two in the back are doctors of the church. That these women who, their prayer and their thought has formed who we are and how we understand God more. And when we really let our genius touch the world like that, it literally, for thousands and millions of generations ahead, transforms the world. So, what is the feminine genius? I think before we can really talk about it and understand, I want to kind of agree with what Rita said earlier, that feminism has a lot of different connotations and in a very real sense has been hijacked. There's a famous story from World War II where, this was before GPS, the Germans picked an area they were going to attack and they circled the perimeter and turned all the signposts the opposite direction. So then they attacked, and it was a battle with a lot of Americans in particular, and they just were destroying them. So many Americans were dying. They kept calling for relief. Relief kept coming, but they ended up in the wrong place. The signposts were directing them all over the area, and it was one of the greatest losses of American soldiers in World War II. And I think it's a good visual for where we stand right now with understanding womanhood and feminism. There's so many messed up signposts telling us where our value is or what we should do to be a woman. Sometimes I present to high school girls or middle school girls, and recently I said, what does a successful woman look like? What is a woman today? And they were like, she has a power suit. I was like, I didn't even know what that was in 7th grade, They have a lot of different understandings of what woman is, and maybe so do we. So what is this genius? What is the particular gift of a woman? And St. Edith Stein, St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross behind me, she said a line that really gripped my heart in college. The world doesn't need what you have, it needs who you are. And I just remember kind of pausing with that for a little bit, like, oh, it's so true. There's so many people in my classes that could turn in the same papers I did or respond to the questions or fill in the blank for your life. Other people can have what you have, but only you are who you are. And that's what the world needs. The world needs you in particular. And as we look at feminism, sometimes it's all been about doing and productivity and sameness and not about the great uniqueness of you individually and of us as women. And so let's go deeper into that and talk about what is the feminine genius. And I remember the first time I read the works of John Paul II and his writings about this, I read feminine genius, and I kind of flipped my hair back, exactly. I know what that means. And it's true that it resonates very easily in our hearts, that there's something great about being a woman. There's something womanly, there's some gift that I have, but what does this mean? What is a genius? Yes, it means smart, but it's a particular gift or talent. So we as human beings, men and women, have the gift of being made in the image and likeness of God, and in that, this particular ability to love that no other creature has, that made like God, we too can love and respond in love and live in love and be beloved. So what is a woman's particular way of loving? The kind of short definition of the feminine genius is the capacity for the other. And again, my sister just had a little baby. Baby Seth was baptized 4 hours ago back in Denver and became a child of God. Pray for him today. But as my sister was going through this pregnancy, and I was actually in the room as this child was birthed, just the reality and the miracle of a woman's body, and that within all of us, whether we've actualized our physical motherhood or not, we have this space, a literal space within us for another human being. And how, as Father was saying in the first talk, the visible reveals the invisible. Or John Paul would say sometimes, the physical reveals the spiritual. That this reality, that we have this space in us for other human beings, speaks to the greater reality that each of us as women have a particular gift for other human beings. We have space, capacity around us for other human beings. And that's where we really come to understand what our gifts are in the world, that we have this unique genius. In fact, this universal recognition of the dignity of the human person is what the world so greatly needs. And you might have noticed that all of the speakers thus far have mentioned John Paul II. And it's because he was such a herald of this message. Have you ever seen the movie Carol? If you haven't, write it down right now and watch it tonight. But it's so powerful to watch John Paul's life and how at a very young age his mother died. And then his brother was a doctor and contracted the disease from one of his patients. And then it was just him and his dad. And in World War I, his father dies. And he's all alone. And there's this powerful scene where he's just crying out like, God, you've left me all alone. And then World War II breaks out. And his friends, he had many, many Jewish friends, just get taken away, killed, murdered, burned to death in concentration camps. And then you think, oh, finally we're at a better place. No, communism comes in and takes over his country. And now he's a priest, and he's been told by his government that God does not exist, and there's no place for God here. And he sees, again, just the human person degraded and degraded and degraded. And this is the person that God chooses to be such a herald of the feminine genius, such a herald of the dignity of the human person, because he saw so frequently in his own life the abuses and the mistreatment that we can have for another human being. And they often say the saint is the antidote to the time. Like, he just came, God called him forth, this little Polish kid from this unknown country and this unknown place, to be this genius and this giant of faith and of love that has touched all of our lives. And to read his writings and to step back and look at the gift of the human person, to let it penetrate our own selves, that we could understand who we are, that we are so beloved, And when we live in that and know that, how we look at and treat other human beings. In fact, when I was, right after college, I did a year and a half of missionary work, and at the end of it, I got the chance to go to Rome, and we got to get our picture with John Paul II. And it was just the best day of my whole life. Like, we were so close. But I'm really tall, which is usually a good thing, but not on the day that you meet John Paul II, because I had to be the farthest away from him. So all the little short girls got to get right up close to John Paul II in his wheelchair in his very old age. But still, 30 feet to John Paul, not a bad place to be. So my whole group of missionaries were smiling with John Paul. And then they said, that's it, there's no more pictures for the day. And they came and got him and wheeled him out. And what happened was, I was the tallest. So I was on the very edge of the group. And John Paul, this man who I'd read and studied, who this message had penetrated my heart, he taught me about St. Edith Stein, and I'd read her writings. I'd come to love this message of the dignity of the person. John Paul rolls right by me, like 2 feet, 3 feet maybe, and he looked at me. And I will never forget this moment of John Paul II's blue eyes peering into mine. And I immediately started crying. And the message that he talks about and said and promotes all over the world, he lives. And it just like pierced my heart, and I felt loved by God immediately and instantly, and I broke down into tears. But it really, as I've prayed about that and thought about that in the years since, that is what happens when we really understand our gift. When we really love and understand another human being, we look at them in such a way that they know, just by a look, that they are loved by God. And in a particular way, we as women have this ability. We have this particular space for other human beings, that we can look at them and love them with a gaze of our eyes, with so many other things. In fact, John Paul talks about women, and he says, the very essence of our being is the capacity for recognizing persons over things, and the primacy of being over doing and material gains. And I think all of us in this room have a mother. We recognize that probably at a very young age, that our moms have taught us the sense of being is more important than the things that will get done. They show us, they reveal it to us. I watch my sister being a mother now, and I went over the other day and literally like books all over their living room. And I was like, are you gonna clean this up? She's like, do you know how many books I read to my son today? And she just couldn't stop smiling. Like, this reality that being with another human being is so much more important than the doing or the tasks or the material gain that we might earn in other ways. And just really recognizing persons over things. So I just want to talk about a few key attributes of the feminine genius, that we have this particular capacity for others. We have a genius all our own that the world desperately needs. And just a few of them we've kind of hit on in the different talks this morning, that we have a particular openness and receptivity built into our very biology, but in the ways that we bring love into the world, we bring that receptivity. We have a generosity that seemingly knows no bounds. We have a compassion and an empathy, and a very particular spirit of maternity. Again, first and foremost spiritual, and in many of us, this actual motherhood, a physical motherhood. So I just want to tell a few stories about these attributes. You might understand I love my sister. So Bridget, her name is, when she was pregnant with her first, she and I worked together. And we started calling her Pukey, because she didn't handle pregnancy very well, and she was pukey. And we just got kind of tired of all her complaining, because we worked together, and I heard it at home, I just heard it a lot, little Bridget, and she was not comfortable. And one day she was driving home, and she was just hungry, but the thought of food was making her feel sick again, and then she had to cook dinner, and just work. She had worked all day, and blah. And she passed the local hospital, and she said, I just saw a woman and a little boy walking away, and there was something about them that I knew I needed to be open to them. And she pulled her car over and kind of got out and said, hi, do you need help? And the woman was like kind of protecting her son, like, who is this lady and why is she stopping? But it was starting to get dark, it was starting to snow. And she said, we could really use a ride to our house. And so Bridget let him in the car and started driving her, and she said she lived 7 miles away. And so as they're getting farther and farther, Bridget said, well, what were you doing at the hospital? Is somebody sick, or what happened? And the woman shared that morning she'd lent her car to a friend, And then the friend was brutally attacked downtown, and the last number in her phone when they found her was this woman, and so they called her. So she said, it's been probably the worst day of my life, and they don't know where my car is. I've been in the hospital all day with my friend, and I just realized I better start walking home now before it's pitch dark. And my sister just realized how many times that day she'd complained about bearing life within her, about the dinner she would make in her nice home with her loving husband, and just the reality of other people's lives that day. And she said, I'm so glad I could help you. And the woman is transforming my sister's life, and my sister's helping out this woman. And this sense of receptivity, the sense of Bridget just knew she was supposed to pull over and help this woman. That we have this ability, when we choose it, to be open to the people that God wants us to for the day. For them to change, for their lives to be changed, but also for them to change ours. That this receptivity is never just one way. When Mary was so open to receive the gift of God, all of our futures were changed. That when we live this kind of receptivity, it transforms the world. Generosity. Again, something we learned very early in life from our own mothers. And I remember when I was 5 years old, I had major open heart surgery, and then I started kindergarten. So my mom would come pick me up from school every day and kind of check in on me a lot and make sure things were going well. And I remember one day she picked me up, and she had no shoes on her feet. And as a 5-year-old, that was like more than I could fathom. So I'm like, Mom, where are your shoes? And she probably appreciated that with all the other Carline moms. So she got closer. She said, well, I met a man on the way here who had no shoes. And I remember being 5, like, I have my red boots, my pink shoes, my other pink shoes. Like, how somebody has no shoes? And it was changing my little 5-year-old heart. And then I remember being 14 and being in high school and learning the word zapatos in Spanish class, which means shoes. And it triggered this memory, and I looked back and I was like, her favorite daughter had open heart surgery. My parents were going through a divorce. My mom was trying to find work after not having a job for the last 10 years, and she was trying to figure out the right housing and place to live with her now separated family. And she thought to give a man on the street the shoes off her feet. That the depth of generosity that we can have as women is astounding when we choose to live it. And my mom did, and she taught me about that. And that when we live this, she changed that man's life and gave him the loafers she was wearing that day. That the generosity, the way that we can be open to another, even in the midst of our own wounds, in the midst of our own pain, is so profound. That we have this particular gift of generosity. And I remember once, I was in a high school presenting, and a girl was like, my dad is generous. So absolutely, I'm not saying these are virtues that only women have, but in a very unique way, a mother's heart, a feminine heart, has this ability to just be generous beyond generosity. And so I challenge you in that. I challenge you to let that generous spirit that you have in you be something that transforms the lives of others. Compassion and empathy. Again, St. Edith Steiner, I read so much from her about this particular gift of women, that we can literally enter into the suffering of another. We can suffer with somebody else. And I recently was out in New York visiting one of my friends who's in the Sisters of Life, and I hadn't been to New York in a long time, and I grew up on a farm, so I was like straightening my shirt, and I was in New York City, and I was feeling good. And after Mass, she said, I want you to meet the most amazing people. And I was like, who's the most amazing person in New York? I'm gonna meet her. And so I come out to the back of the church, and there's a tiny little girl. She was maybe 3 feet tall. I could tell right away she had some special things going on in her life. She had a lot of different genetic diseases. In fact, I found out later it's so particular, she's the only one in the world who has kind of the conditions that she has. And even though she was so tiny, she's actually 5 years old. And so my friend crouches down, and then she crouches down, and she's like 1 foot now. Everybody's so small on the ground. And she says, I want you to meet my friend Kate. Can you tell her about Jesus? And I was like, wow, okay, let's get deep. So she throws her arms back, and she's like, he loves you so much. And I was like, this is the most amazing person in New York. And she just grabbed my heart. And so we went up and made a visit in front of the tabernacle, and I was praying next to her, and she has these little fingers that are locked tight. And so she was praying like this, and I said to Jesus, like, whatever Grace is praying right now, that's my prayer. Like, I don't know what it is, but And little Grace turns to me, and I'm like, what? And she goes, he's really in there, you know. Yes, he is. Just this deep faith of a little girl. And so we leave the chapel, and we're about to have brunch with all the sisters, and my friend, Sister Virginia Joy, says, could I have everyone's attention? Could you please pray for Tommy? He's the son of one of our coworkers who was born yesterday, and he was born blind. And we all kind of paused, like, oh, how tragic to just discover that yesterday, and the lifetime of dealing with those issues and crosses. And so there's a momentary pause, then I was like, where's the creamer? You know, kind of on to breakfast, and everybody went back kind of into breakfast mode. And I'm getting my coffee creamer and looking over for wherever this cute little kid is, and I see her making a beeline for my friend. So I like grab my coffee and start walking over to where she is. And I realize there's huge tears coming down her face. And I was like, who hurt her? I will kill them. I love this little kid. And she comes right up to my friend, and she throws her arms up like this, and she's got her little locked fingers, and she says, I would pray a whole rosary for that friend of yours who's hurt. And it had probably been 5 minutes since this conversation. And I just kind of stepped back, and I was like, that's a feminine genius. Like, somebody who, she suffered with this little boy who I'd already forgotten about. She immediately related to him. Like, she said, Tommy, our coworker's son. And here she is, that friend of yours. That she saw this little Tommy as a person, and she entered into his suffering, and not just to cry, something I do a lot, not just to be emotional about it, but I could see she was suffering with, and then to respond in a way to live it with him. She gave what she could give, and that was a huge act of prayer. So my friend says, do you know how to pray a whole rosary? Little. She's like, yeah, I do every night with my dad. But this beautiful witness of compassion and empathy of a 5-year-old has literally transformed my life. That when we live true compassion, when we enter into the sufferings of others and let this be our reality, it transforms the world. And little Grace has had a huge impact on my life. And I will never forget her. I have her picture up at my desk at work. That we are called to live our feminine genius out in the world. Last but not least, there's many attributes of the feminine genius, is the spirit of maternity. That we as women, see a mom in the back holding her little baby, that we have this definite spirit of maternity. And for many of you in this room, it's actualized in physical motherhood. But regardless, we have this deep mothering ability in all of us, and there's souls that need us. There's people that God will place in our path that we're called to be a mother to. We're called to bring about the wholeness and see the richness and the beauty of that soul and call it forth. And a beautiful example of this is my friend Vanessa, who's a teacher. And she was telling me the story that kids came in from recess, little 4th graders, and there were 2 that clearly had a little fight of some sort. And she went over to the one that looked more hurt, and she saw the troublemaker in the back, who's hilarious, but probably caused this issue. And she, kind of said, Noah, is everything okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Immediately doesn't want to talk about it. So she just let it be, and then she's teaching, and then there was a little break, and Ricky, the troublemaker, comes up to her, and she can tell he's really upset, and he's like, I need to talk to you. So they go into the hallway, and he just starts crying really hard, and snot coming out of his nose, his face is a mess, and she's like, what, get a grip, are you okay, what's wrong? And he's like, I hurt Noah, punish me. And she's like, he leaned forward with this wet face, and she's like, clearly he was sorry for whatever had happened. And she didn't ask him. Kind of a danger, the non-feminine genius, is that we're like, what happened? Who did it? Where? What? How many times? Oh my God. We sometimes get too into the details. So she just stayed out where she was called to be, and she said, okay. And she looked at him and she was like, I need you to apologize to Noah for whatever you did and to include him tomorrow at recess. And she said, Noah, or Ricky, who was standing there, couldn't believe it. He was like, what? He was like, that's all? Okay. And she said that night she was praying for them in this situation, whatever it was. And she's like, isn't that us after confession? We're like, 3 Hail Marys? Okay. The gift of God in forgiveness. And so she was just like, it's so simple sometimes, but just do it, live it. So the next day after recess, in came these little 4th graders, and she said they were just beaming, radiant. Nothing's better than a radiant little 4th grade face. And she just said, this is it. This is my gift of maternity right now. She's not married. She She recognized God called me into that situation to bring it back to its wholeness. That the spirit of maternity, there's so many different ways, and it's going to be unique in particular in each one of you, that your genius will be needed in the world. And so to not be afraid to respond into that in the ways that the Holy Spirit's inviting you. And I know our next talk is on the Blessed Mother, so I won't talk too much about her, but I can't finish without a call to her, that we look to her, that Mary, John Paul said, is the highest expression of the feminine genius. And that we talk about women of strength behind me, that we have this queen of the universe. My mom tells me that when I was little, speaking of hair flipping, I told her once that I wanted to be queen of the universe, and she was like, positions taken. Not quite there yet. That we have this mother, we have this queen of the universe who reveals to us what this spiritual gift is that we have, this feminine genius. We have the highest expression of the feminine genius behind us, with us, next to us at all times. I loved when we did the litany, the gate of heaven. This woman who opens and welcomes and shows us what it is to be a woman. And so just to quickly go through these points, again, her receptivity, that openness and readiness that Mary had for the gift of God, we see particularly at the Annunciation. And one of my favorite images of Mary is the statue of her with these huge hands. They're proportionally just gigantic to the rest of it, and the fingers are really elongated, but that true receptivity that we have as women, she was so ready to receive the gift of God, that Mary teaches us about receptivity. She teaches us to be open and to receive the gift, but that as soon as it's received, to not cling to it. Again, kind of a negative attribute we might have is to cling. When something is good, to cling to it, and Mary always lets it go. She immediately runs in haste to her cousin, and in her generosity, loves and serves. She is now the mother of God, running in haste to serve, to be generous, to be endlessly generous to the needs of others. And we don't know all the details about her hidden life, but we know, accompanying Jesus in so much, that constant gift of her feminine genius. And then we look to the foot of the cross, and we see her empathy and her compassion, the suffering of a mother when her son is suffering. Maybe many of you have had that experience and know that the depth of what it is to suffer as a mother, and you so wish you could take the place of your loved one suffering. But really living that part of his life, that crucified reality of the Christian life. And following that, the true spirit of maternity, that her constant opening up to receive the gift of God and immediately turning it back and giving it, expanded her heart so much so that at the foot of the cross, God calls her to be mother of all of us. John, behold your mother. Mother, behold your son. That we have this powerful gift of spiritual maternity covering each and every one of us in this room, all the women and children behind us and before us. And there's so much that God has wanted to give us in this mother, and that she's all of our mothers. And so we have to respond. We can leave this conference and pretend we didn't hear anything and go back to our lives the same, or we can really take a new step in our mission, really recognizing how much the world needs our feminine genius, that it's waning and dying for lack of Christ. The world so greatly needs the feminine, the authentic feminine presence in every aspect of life and society. And it comes through gift of self, comes through dying to ourselves. Lent is a really good time to reflect on that and looking and being aware of the needs of others. If my sister had just really been so hungry, but not hungry, and hadn't seen that woman on the side of the road, she wouldn't have been able to stop and help her that night. If we're not aware and open and dying to ourselves to see and to have that space for others, it won't be there. And so I just want to really challenge you to do that, to really be a woman who loves. In fact, Venerable Archbishop Fulton Sheen said, "A woman's heart that isn't loving is like the Titanic in a pond." And I love that image. It's so true. Our hearts are Titanic. They are so big. We have such a huge capacity for love. And so often we can not live in that, not live in our own understanding of love, not remember to be open to the needs of others, get bogged down by the things of the world. And God calls us into this, especially today, to really live in his love and to allow our hearts to be for others. In fact, in one of the documents from the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, we read, man only finds himself in a sincere gift of himself. That this sincere gift is what we're called to, this response the world needs desperately, and we need desperately to get to heaven, is to live this true sense of our genius in the world. And it really matters, and it matters for a lot of reasons, but I want to just kind of end with this quote from Pope Benedict XVI. He said, "All people desire to leave a lasting mark." And I kind of stopped there when I first read that. It's so true, we desire, I wanted to be queen of the universe, so. But we have this in us, this desire to leave a lasting mark. But what endures, he goes on to say, money does not, even buildings do not, nor books. After a certain time, longer or shorter, all these things disappear. The only thing that lasts forever is the human soul, the human person created by God for eternity. The fruit that endures, all of us, feminine geniuses, the fruit that endures is all that we have sown in human souls: love, knowledge, a gesture capable of touching hearts, words that open the soul to the joy of the Lord. And immediately I just think of that little girl, Grace, like her words opened my soul to the joy of the Lord. That when we really live out this feminine genius, we leave a sincere, lasting mark on the world. My mother's love for me has left a lasting mark forever on my soul. The many spiritual mothers that have come into my life, Sister Prudence of the least among them, the words she's spoken to me have transformed me, have brought me to this podium today. That don't underestimate the gift of your genius and don't be afraid to use it. And I think that's kind of just what I want to end with, is that you have a call to use it. The world, St. Augustine said it, the world needs what you are. That it's so in desperate need of true, authentic feminism to transform our culture that is so consumed with money and buildings, all these things that are going to disappear. But the things that really endure, the way we can impact another human soul, is so, so powerful. So I challenge you and really invite you to not let this conference just be a great Saturday, because it has been a great Saturday, but to really let it transform your heart, that your heart and mind together go forth into the world, and all those that you're called to, all the ones that are kind of in your sphere of influence, the ones God has placed before you, might come to know your feminine genius, and that as you live that gift out, like Mary, you live the fullness of God's plan for your life and the joy that comes in living in His will. So thank you so much for being here today and for this chance to share with you.